Hey there, everyone. Welcome. I can see that YouTube is loading us up here, so I'm going to give it a couple of minutes. I hope you're all doing really well. Thank you so much for joining me. Okay, I want to make sure I've got my screen set. All right. So it looks like we are good to go. So today I'm just popping in for a Q&A live chat. And so if you are watching live, let me know if you've got any questions. There's so much happening in astrology through the middle of July. So I might say a couple of things about a couple of things that are going on. But if you are tuning in live, let me know where you are joining from and if there's anything on your mind astrologically. I know I keep being drawn to the Venus retrograde, which is such a big astrological signature for this middle part of the year. Venus does begin her retrograde on July 22nd at 28 degrees of Leo. And Venus is going to be retrograde through the latter part of July, all of August, and the early part of September. And that's such an important kind of reevaluation, reassessment cycle. We do see typically a lot of societal changes, kind of what we value and what we want to prioritize and what we're willing to stand up for in society really shifting, or, things, themes and topics coming to the fore with Venus retrograde. But if you're interested in how that might be affecting your chart or what that might be like for individuals, let me know. Of course, a little bit more immediately, we've got Mars having just come into Virgo, and towards the end of next week, around the 20th of July, we will have Mars opposing Saturn. And that's an aspect of kind of effort and frustration. There will be themes of consolidation. And I think we're all going to get some good lessons in time management, as well as working with the consequences or the outcomes of our choices. That's so much a part of Mars opposing Saturn. So I can see Joanne is here from New Mexico. Welcome. Eddie is joining us from Sacramento in California. Det is here. Welcome. Monster Magic from Columbus. KP is joining us from Cleveland. I can see one of my dear students joining us from Australia. Lucille is here. Nestle is here. Welcome. Rihanna is here. So if you have any questions about astrology, let me know. This is sort of just an open chat for a little bit of time, and I'm happy to answer any astro questions that you might have. I'm sure there's a few things I'll mention as we go. I also just recently gave a webinar on aspects with Mars, which was really rich and interesting. And of course, one of those experiences where there's so much material that I felt like we could have gone for 3 days, but we're certainly able to give some of the highlights of things to consider when working with aspects to Mars. But if there's more on your mind about that, let me know today as well. And of course, if you are looking for training or classes in astrology, pop over to my website, kellysastrology.com. I've got such a big training catalog there, from one-off webinars to 4-part training, as well as my structured 18-month astrology training program. And very soon we'll be launching the group mentoring for 2023. That's a very special, intimate program for senior students, newer astrologers. So when you've taken a lot of study in astrology already and you're wanting to make that transition into setting up your own astrology practice, that is when group mentoring is right for you. So we'll be starting in mid-September, but spots will open around the middle of July. So let me know if you're interested in that, and I can make sure you get the details, or just check out my website, kellysastrology.com, over the next few days. Okay, so I can see some questions coming in, so let's dive right in. Okay, so question here, can I talk about my perspective on Venus almost making a conjunction with Mars, but not perfecting the conjunction? Yeah, this is a really interesting feature of what's been happening, is that Mars has essentially been chasing Venus down in the zodiac, which is not the typical way of things. Usually Venus moves more quickly than Mars, so she tends to move towards Mars connect with Mars, and then move on. But because she's been slowing down lately, you might have noticed over the last few weeks, we've had Venus and Mars in Leo together, but we've actually had kind of Mars come through Leo behind Venus. And then, she's going to go retrograde. I beg your pardon. Sorry. Mars and Venus have been in Leo together. I'm just checking my ephemeris here, so I make sure I get the details. But they haven't actually come to their conjunction. So Venus hasn't quite caught up to Mars like she normally would. And in fact, I don't believe Venus and Mars will come together until early 2024. That's just off the top of my head. So that can feel like something that has gotten very close, but then has not come together. When an aspect doesn't perfect, we typically say there is some sort of disruption, or something that was planned or intended is either delayed or interfered with. And what Venus actually does instead is get together with Mercury. So shortly after Venus goes retrograde, Mercury comes along into Leo and meets Venus. So I think when we're talking about, Venus almost making a conjunction with Mars and then that not happening, but instead Venus going to meet Mercury, it's almost as though a choice is made and we're pursuing something, or we're going after a goal or a project, and then we change our mind. Or for circumstances outside our control, we cannot go any further in that particular direction at this particular time. And instead, something else comes up that we put our focus on in the short term. Venus will conjunct Mercury shortly after its retrograde. So this is July 27th when Mercury meets Venus retrograde. That'll happen about 28 Leo, a few days after Venus starts her retrograde. And so that's a little bit about what I think there. But if you have more on your mind, let me know. But I'm just going to double check, because I'm pretty sure that it is early next year. Yeah, it's about mid-February in Aquarius that Venus actually comes to link with Mars. And so there may have been something that looked like it was going to come together in June or July as Venus and Mars were kind of closing in on each other in Leo, and it hasn't played out as you might have expected. And there may be a second chance that comes forward in February of 2024. So that's how I'd be thinking about that. But let me know if you want me to say more on that piece. That's such a thoughtful question. Thank you. I can see Eddie is asking about Venus going retrograde in their 6th house, and is that good or bad if they're wanting to get a new cat? So look, 6th house is definitely pets. So cats, dogs, other small animals, any kind of domestic animal or an animal that you might keep as a pet would sort of fall under animals in the 6th house. And so I think it's lovely that you would want to open your home to a new cat. Many of you know that I'm a cat parent myself, and I love my fur babies. And I think having Venus in your 6th house for an extra long time is definitely going to activate that desire for kind of love and affection with a pet. The thing that's coming up for me about, essentially should you or shouldn't you do it? There may be a couple of delays in the journey to adopt a new cat. Or it might be that you're still kind of in two minds, figuring out exactly how you want to approach this. I would say there's no hurry. If something happens that feels like it's a little bit divinely intended, go for it. There's always that lovely confirmation from the universe when we get that synchronicity. But if you have to really put in a lot of effort, or you try and it seems harder than expected, or that door closes and then that door closes, if you notice that you seem to be getting knockbacks around it, I might wait until the end of the Venus retrograde, early September. And, technically speaking, after the Venus retrograde would be the better time to bring your new pet home. So basically after the 3rd of September. So anytime through September or October, while Venus is still in your 6th house, but no longer retrograde, can just avoid any regrets or any of those kind of initial snafus with adjusting, the pet adjusting and you adjusting, that type of thing. So that would be my thought there. Welcome everyone who is joining us. I can see Andrew from the UK. Welcome. Lottie's here, Malone is here, Monster Magic, Cindy is here from Santa Fe. Welcome, welcome. And I can see so many great questions coming through. So I'm just going to keep powering through the questions and we'll see how many we can get through in our time together today. So H2O Painter is asking that they heard it's a bad time to start a new romantic relationship. So I'm assuming this is about Venus retrograde because that's a very common piece of advice that is given. I don't know how accurate it is. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Retrograde doesn't mean don't do things, but it might mean like it's not a red light, don't do this. It probably means orange flashing light. Proceed with caution. Because also for all of us who may, I've been in a long-term relationship, but I remembered what it was like when I was dating. If you're lucky enough to meet someone that you spark with, that you want to spend time with, you do want to enjoy that. You want to make the most of that. We can't always control those magical moments when we spark with someone special. We can't always control the timing. Sometimes we can be aware that it's, astrologically maybe a more supported time and we should go for it. And other times we've got these proceed with caution signals, sometimes based on our personal astrological chart. There are some cycles where I'll say to clients, let's not go down the relationship road right now. Let's take the energy that you have and focus on these other tasks or topics that are more important right now, knowing that a year from now or 2 years from now, you're going to open up and be in a better place personally and a better place astrologically for relationships. But when I'm making those interpretations or forecasts for clients, I'm not using Venus retrograde. I'm using their personal transits and secondary progressions rather than Venus retrograde itself. So the way I think about romance and love and Venus retrograde is that Venus is about reconnecting with our relationship to pleasure, love, affection, delight, and joy. And there's a component of that which involves reawakening or reconnecting with ourself around those topics in terms of what is it that you do for pleasure and relaxation? What is it? What are the hobbies or activities or experiences that are joyful for you? How do you show that kind of loving, attentive care to yourself? And what are the most enjoyable ways to show loving affection to others? And so there is this sort of reassessing, reconnecting. Sometimes there's a remembering, and sometimes there's I've always done this to show my love or affection to someone else, but it really costs me a lot. So I'm going to stop doing that. So we get a lot of insight and lessons when Venus is retrograde. The other planet that is really important for each of us around romantic relationships is the planet that rules the 7th house in our individual chart. Now, for most of us, that's not going to be Venus. If you have Gemini or Virgo as your descendant or 7th house sign, your personal relationship planet is Mercury. And actually, you want to watch the aspects that Mercury is making by transit to track your personal relationship cycles. And so if you have a Taurus or a Libra descendant and Venus is your personal planet of relationships, then Venus retrograde might speak more directly to love for you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't develop a new relationship. It might indicate there's some delays or some crossed wires. If you're in a long-term relationship, Venus retrograde can be a time where you are trying to reconnect or rediscover that kind of playful, romantic, maybe flirtatious, pleasurable connection. So that's a lot of information to say that I don't think it's necessarily a bad time to start a new relationship. Perhaps keep that orange light image in mind and proceed with caution rather than bench yourself and maybe miss something that could be worth exploring. Keeping in mind that not every romantic relationship we have is meant to be our forever person. There are some romantic relationships where we just grow and learn so much that I wouldn't want you to miss out on that. So that's a little bit about how I'm thinking about that. Okay, so and I've just heard back from Eddie here about the question earlier about Venus retrograde in the 6th and getting a new cat. And Eddie's saying that it seems like things are really falling into place for the cat to join us. We didn't even really go looking for it. Fantastic. the cosmos has its hand in that moment and in those synchronicities. So that to me always helps confirm it's a yes. And Ileana's saying it's a great metaphor about Venus retrograde and the orange flashing light. I know we often hear so much negativity about retrogrades, but I promise you that of all the kinds of timing cycles and transiting aspects and planetary configuration, a retrograde is definitely more in the mild end of the spectrum rather than in the really problematic kind of don't go here end of the spectrum. The more I've worked with astrology, particularly over the last 5 years, the more I've come to appreciate a planetary retrograde as an emphasis. And so if you think about the Leo part of your personal birth chart, think about that area of life being emphasized over this next few months with Venus spending so much time in Leo. And if that Leo part of your chart, as it gets emphasized, you may remember or resurrect things that you really loved about this part of your life that have been neglected or that you forgot. And you might also reconnect with people that can be helpful for you in this part of your life. But some of the things you remember might be habits that you've been wanting to ditch. And so I think we can get a mix of beginnings and endings out of a retrograde. Okay, so scrolling back to our questions now. So I can see your question, Det, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, I apologize if not, about Mars in Virgo, but let me know something a little more specific that you're curious about Mars in Virgo. Okay, great. Lottie has a very quick, simple, technical question about the difference between the true node and the mean node. It's very small in terms of like minutes in the zodiac. The true node is a little bit more exact. The mean node is a slight average calculation. As far as I know, most astrologers do work with the true node, although correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just thinking of a few colleagues I know that do work with the true node. I'm working with the true node, and so we are looking at July 17 as the sign change date for the nodes into Aries and Libra. There isn't a big difference between the true node and the mean node, and so it might mean the exact day of the nodes changing signs might be off by 1 or 2 days, but it isn't going to, as far as I know, it's not going to make a huge difference. It's not like you're going to be out by a month or 6 months, for instance. Off the top of my head, that's what I've got for you on that. Hopefully it's helpful. But if I'm definitely feeling a little bit of a weird retrograde vibe today. So if I'm getting anything off technically, feel free to correct me. Joanne's asking about Venus retrograde in the 4th house. It's happening on their Venus-Pluto conjunction. So Joanne, I'm assuming you have Venus conjunct Pluto in Leo in your natal 4th house, and we're going to have Venus retrograde go through that part of your chart. So there's a few things I can say about that, which I will do in a minute, but I also want to remind you and everyone else listening that Venus has been retrograde in Leo every 8 years since we were all born. And so while we want to tune into this Venus retrograde in Leo cycle in 2023, we want to keep in mind that this cycle, that we lived through it, we explored it, we expressed it, we were informed and influenced by it in July and August of 2015. In the middle part, July and August, 8 years prior to 2015 is 2007. And then 8 years prior to that, I think, is 1999. So especially for those of us that maybe aren't in our 20s right now, we've had a number of Venus retrograde in Leo cycles. And I mention that because if you have natal planets in Leo, chances are you have had Venus retrograde over that part of your chart already. And if that's the case, you want to think back 8 years ago, 16 years ago, 24 years ago, and think back to how the topics of your Leo house were activated. So for you, Joanne, this is 4th house. This is about home and family relationships. It's about the dynamics between you and a partner, if you live with a partner, about you and any children that you have, and about you and your parents or your family of origin. So the fourth house does cover a number of really significant and influential people in our lives. And so we kind of need a lot of time to go through sorting out partner stuff and children's stuff and parent stuff if Venus retrograde is in your fourth house. So this will apply for anyone who has a Taurus rising and is using that whole sign fourth house. Sorry, using the whole sign chart format. Taurus rising will put Leo on the fourth. So Joanne, with Venus retrograde going over your natal Venus-Pluto conjunction in Leo, I would really encourage you to be telling the truth, being honest, even if it feels a little brutal or a little raw, because when we get Pluto activated in our chart, we really want to speak to the truth of things. We want to be upfront about what is and isn't okay. We don't want to be faking it. We want to be genuine. So we don't want to be like, accepting gifts because we made one offhand comment years ago and now we always get, I don't know, say you said you loved sunflowers and every year now a family member gives you something to do with sunflowers, but you didn't really mean it. You just thought those particular sunflowers how many years ago were lovely. Hopefully that you're getting the gist. That idea of being really truthful about what you do and don't enjoy, about the kinds of relationship dynamics, you know, the power dynamics. If Venus retrograde is going over Pluto in Leo, so there'll be a whole generation of you that are being asked to be maybe a little bit more clear or a little bit more regal into that kind of queen-like royal energy of this is okay for me and that's not okay. So much about Venus retrograde in Leo is about raising our standards and kind of acting from that place of, I know I deserve respect. I mean, we all do, but sometimes we need that reminder. And Venus in Leo is definitely bringing that reminder about the standards by which it is and isn't okay for other people to interact with us. Now, with Pluto, we always get topics to do with power dynamics and also things like secrets and hidden things. And sometimes we need to kind of dig back into our memories or the past. If Venus retrograde is going over Pluto in your chart, you know, this is what happened then. Maybe there's a little bit more healing or integrating or releasing required about a past event that was a little intense or uncomfortable. That can sometimes be tied to Pluto as well. So there's a few themes there, Joanne. I feel like anytime I'm talking about, you know, Pluto things or natal chart things, I could go on for 45 minutes, but hopefully that gives you a few tips and ideas. And so we talked about home and family. The other piece is your living situation. So not being afraid to ask for the kind of home environment that you want. Sometimes when we have a Venus transit to our fourth house, this would apply to anyone, you know, whether you have Leo on the fourth, or maybe you have Virgo on the fourth. And once Venus finishes with this Leo retrograde, she's going to be in your fourth when she's in Virgo or in Libra later this year. When Venus is in the fourth house, we want to make our home a little bit more comfortable and we want to add a few little luxuries to our living space. So that can be something to be exploring as well. Okay. Oh, this is such a great question from Rihanna. Can you suggest what someone could do to support their second house rule of the moon when it is in the 12th house? I seem to have finance issues. So Rihanna, I actually have the exact same thing, the ruler of the second house in the 12th. And I have recorded a separate YouTube video on that. It's called something to do with money, I think. And the 12th. And I'm going to find that link after and put it in the comment section below, but you're of course welcome to search around on the YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, and find that. But let me give you a few points. So Rihanna, when the ruler of the second, so keep in mind for everybody, the planet that rules the sign on your second house cusp, that is your money planet. And whatever's going on with that planet is going to provide some clues and insights as to your stuff around money. And so first up, if you have a Cancer second house and you have the moon ruling that, we know there's going to be an emotional quality to finances. Now that can work for you and against you, depending on what kind of emotions you're bringing to the table. Now, for some people, the trickiest part for this is making financial decisions when they're in an emotional state. So sometimes that can be spending to feel better. So there's like comfort shopping or comfort spending that can happen. Now, one of the really functional combinations of having Cancer on the second house cusp is that Cancer is a very protective sign that really wants to hold on to what it has. Now, when you apply that attitude to your personal finances, that can really work to your advantage, because one of the really functional expressions of Cancer on the second house cusp is this tendency to be a little averse with debt or borrowing. The idea of, maybe our grandparents, certainly my grandparents' approach to money was, and even my parents' approach to money was, you only bought things if you had the money for it. You didn't put things on credit cards. You didn't get loans for things other than a house, for instance. And so if you can tap into that really protective, preserving Cancerian quality, that is going to help you. And most people with Cancer on the second house that I've worked with, that have worked through some of the emotional stuff that might be more problematic and kind of got to the good tendencies of this combination, they actually have a dollar figure. The dollar figure can be different because people come from different backgrounds in different countries with different currencies that have different values. But there will be a number that represents financial security for you. And so it's like a rainy day fund or a cash stash, as I would sometimes call it, kind of informally. And so I'd really explore what it feels like when you have a little bit of savings. And if you've never had savings, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you give yourself that opportunity of what does it feel like to have a few $100s, or maybe a couple of $1,000s, or maybe even a larger sum, as you tune into that feeling, that is going to help you make really kind of generative and really nurturing financial choices. So that's that's just the Cancer second house. But you mentioned specifically about the moon ruling that Cancer second house being in the 12th. And of course, this is where we can go a little awry, because in the 12th house, we are not always clearly seeing things. So this can be a part of our chart that seems a bit abstract, or can seem a little bit mystical. And that can be initially tricky when it comes to finances. Now, that said, if you have a Cancer second house in a whole sign chart format, that means you have a Gemini rising and you have Taurus on the 12th. That means your moon is in Taurus, which, if that's the case, that is an exceptional placement for the moon. That's the exalted sign of the moon. And Taurus is really great at accumulation, at growing and building things, thinking about like a farming approach, if you like. Now, the moon in Taurus does like good quality things. That can be where some of the money issues come from. But it's very good at that slow, steady building. Typically, a placement like this would indicate increasing financial stability throughout life. But the missing piece, Rihanna, that I'll just leave with you as something to think about would be whatever aspects that moon in Taurus is involved in. Does it oppose a planet in Scorpio? Is it square something in Leo that might be contributing to some of the financial issues that you might be having? And so there is definitely some good potential here. There may just be some bumps or challenges or hurdles to overcome to get to the good stuff. But based on what I've been able to determine from what you've shared so far, I would definitely encourage you to persist with it, because I think when you get to the end or figure it out, it's going to be really good for you. So let me know any clarifying info that you might need. And thank you for sharing that question. That's such a good one. I'm going to have a quick scroll through. There's so many questions, and I think we'll have time for just one more. If you are here and you haven't yet entered your question, definitely let me know. I do want to take a moment here and let you know about my next online astrology course, which is coming up starting August 7th. It's called Talking About Challenging Aspects, and it's everything you need to know to understand what a challenging aspect is in the birth chart, and some of the language and concepts that inform how we can interpret that for clients or for ourselves, so we have a better understanding of what a technically challenging aspect might look and express like in real life, as well as a few insights about how you might be able to work with that. So that course starts August 7th, and you can find out details about that on the website, kellysastrology.com now. Now, that course is an intermediate level training, and so it is recommended for students who have already taken structured classes in astrology, either through myself or with another teacher. But if you've got any questions, pop over to the homepage and let us know there. Okay, so let me get back to our YouTube Q&A box. Let's have a little look here. I see. Cindy, this is just a quick question. You've got your birth chart, but how do you know your houses? I have a video on the houses, an introduction to the houses in the chart. So I would check that out because that might help you. It's very visual, and so you'll want to check out some of my videos that have that chart format in them, because that's the best way to have a look at that. Victoria's asking about the Venus in Leo and making a comment about 2015 with Jupiter and Mars having been co-present in Leo last time Venus was retrograde there. You're 100% right that even though Venus is retrograde every 8 years in Leo, we do have some other unique cofactors. And the 2015 had Jupiter in Leo while Venus was retrograde there. That was an important part of that cycle. And what we've got this year, 2023, with Venus retrograde in Leo, we've got Uranus in Taurus, which we didn't have last time. And so that square aspect from Venus in Leo to Uranus in Taurus, we're actually going to get 3 iterations of that. We're going to have the first iteration when Venus is direct and will square Uranus. That happened early in July, around July 2nd. We're going to have the second iteration when Venus is retrograde, square Uranus, and that is going to happen around August 9th. And then we'll have the third iteration of Venus now direct after the retrograde, square Uranus. That happens at the very end of September. And so that does add a little bit more of a chaotic quality, a innovative quality, a kind of fight for freedom theme, which is very unique to the Venus retrograde of 2023. So yes, that's a great point, Victoria. And that is really important to keep in mind. Okay. Let's have a little look. Somebody's saying that I missed their question at the top about Venus retrograde at 2 Aquarius. How can you work with the Venus retrograde transit better? So if you have a natal planet in early Aquarius, the Venus retrograde won't be directly triggering that. The Venus retrograde degrees for 2023 are 12 Leo to 28 Leo. So if you have planets in that zone in Leo, or from 12 to 28 Aquarius, where the Venus retro will oppose it, that would really bring that intensive Venus retrograde repetition theme in. But for the rest of us that might have planets in Leo or Taurus or Scorpio that are in those first 12 degrees of the sign, it's really just kind of almost a standard Venus transit there. It's just going to be that one hit activation. But I think the way that I would approach that is that Venus retrograde will be in your 5th house. And that would be how I would encourage you to work with that. The idea of resurrecting pleasure. I mean, the 5th house is the house of Venus's joy in our chart. It's a very Venusian part of the chart, and it really invites you into this playful, delightful approach to life. It can enhance relationships with children if you have them, but it also is about developing your own relationship with pleasure in terms of enjoyable things that you do. But the 5th house in traditional astrology is also the house of sexual intimacy. And so if you're an Aries rising with Leo in the 5th house, this Venus retrograde in Leo cycle might also be about a cultivating or a reclaiming of something in that physical pleasure, sexual intimacy zone as well. So we can also think about that when we're talking about the 5th house. All right, team. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all so much for your wonderful questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them today. If you've just joined us, the full broadcast will be available very soon up on my YouTube channel. And if you are interested in more intermediate training in astrology, I hope you'll check out my Talking About Challenging Aspects training starting in August. Until then, everyone, take good care. Thank you again for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. All right, team. Bye for now.